Okay, today I have the great pleasure of getting to meet a couple of new people. I was turned on to these folks by the whole LA crew. It's funny. Everybody brings these two up whenever we talk about modular stuff, and so I was really excited when they agreed to join me for a chat. I'm talking to Stephen McCaul and Chris Kaiser from Noise Engineering. Noise Engineering is one of these sneaky popular companies. It's not one that you necessarily hear a lot of, but whenever you talk to people about what are the things that make up important parts of their rigs or what are their favorite modules, Modules by Noise Engineering keeps on coming up. So with that, I'm going to say hello to Stephen and Chris. Hey guys, how are you doing?
Hey, doing good.
Thanks a lot for taking the time out of your schedule. I'm sure you had to stop like boxing and stickering and soldering for a little bit in order to do this. So I appreciate you taking the time.
We're really happy to be here.
Yeah. For people who aren't familiar with your stuff, and there's not going to be a lot, but there'll be some, why don't we have you give a really quick tour of what it is that you do?
Okay, so yeah, we are Noise Engineering. We make Eurorack modules. The focus of a lot of our modules is actually doing sort of high-end digital engineering in the Euro space, as well as doing a lot of kind of funky tricks to make our stuff sound cool. We have a lot of modules that are really meant to give you a really wide variety of tonality that are all parameterizable with knobs. And that's something that's really hard to do with an analog oscillator, and something that digital really excels at. And so that's a large part of our focus is just digital sound generation. And then we have a whole lot of modules that are really meant for live use. They're meant to be small and compact and not universal, but very flexible for making music for how big they are. So that's a whole other line of modules we have. Rhythm generators, and putting out a bunch of CV control stuff this year, and a bunch more rhythm and time control stuff as well that are in that line of products. So.
Sure. Now, one of the things that people, even if they don't catch the name of the company as shagging something out of their brains, as soon as they hear a name of one of your modules, they'll be like, "Oh, those guys," right?
Yep.
I mean, there are a few I could probably make out, but for most part, I'm not sure where they're coming from. What is a Basimilus Iteritas?
So the naming, there's a couple, I guess, reasons for the naming. I mean, the first one is just sort of fun. They're not meant to be serious. Some people are almost upset at them, and it's like these are all meant to be a little bit jokey. I mean, on the website we actually have etymologies for all the word. They're not always true. Sometimes they're intentionally the opposite of truth because it's funnier that way. So there's a lot of just sort of tongue-in-cheek stuff going on. And now we have enough modules. There's sort of an internal vocabulary. Like Iteritas is what we use to denote an oscillator. So one of the reasons I liked this scheme, as a good example, our most popular module is the Basimilus Iteritas. And it started life as a drum synthesizer, but calling it that really puts a limit on what it is to people. You know, you give something a name and it tells you what it is, and then also implicitly sort of limits how you think about it. And that module in particular is very versatile. People buy it as a drum and use it as a lead or a bass line all the time because it's really just a small standalone voice. And so I like the idea that the name is not actually limiting how people think about what the module is because of sort of predefined associations with, that are just implicit in anytime you give something a name that is from a language that you know.
Yeah.
They're also, because of the sort of Latin-ish, I use air quotes around that, if you know a little bit of Latin, you can kind of maybe get to what we're getting at with the naming. But what's fun about it, too, is that, every time we do a show, somebody comes up to us and pronounces every module differently.
Oh, sure.
In-house, we just kind of call them by their initials. So
Okay.
the Basimilus Iteritas altar is just the BIA, because who has time to say all of those words?
Right, I hear you. Yeah, the tongue twisting would get pretty serious after a while, sure. Are all of your modules digital?
No, but mostly.
Yeah.
80%, 90%.
Interesting.
My background is spent a very long time writing software. So, but that's sort of just what, my normal wheelhouse involves software. So being able to put software in a module is just a technical strength of ours. So that's sort of where we've ended up finding the most hay to make.
Well, now you've opened two doors there. I'm going to take one of them, and then we'll come back to the second, which is your background. One of the things I love to do in my podcast is talk to people about how they got to where they are. And I'm interested in both of your stories, getting some sense of how you get to the point of making much beloved and hard to pronounce modules that seem to have captured people's attention. So how did you get there? Where did you start? And maybe even before the software thing, how did you get interested in music and musical instrumentation being what you're interested in throwing your software at?
Yeah, that's a big question. Summarize 40 years. I'll just go quick highlights chronologically, I guess. So as a kid, elementary school, I took 4 years of piano lessons, the Suzuki method, where you get to memorize everything to get to. And then played in acoustic bass in an orchestra for another 4 or 5 years. Then at that point in time in my life, I started getting into industrial music. Became very fascinated with synthesizers, and that just always had a sort of natural predilection towards science and engineering as well, which just made I was pretty obsessed with synths back then, and I had no money at all. So there was a lot of pawn shop buying of horrible things that were not good synths and whatnot. Then I went to college to try to become an electrical engineer. That didn't pan out for a variety of reasons. At Louisiana Tech, actually, I spent a year there and then moved back to my home, which I did not originally say, but I was actually born in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas. But then I spent 8 years in and out of college, basically spending most of my free time writing music and then working in various tech jobs for 8 years. At some point, I got sick of not having a degree and decided I needed to get one. Decided that I needed something that was challenging because I was really bored of school, hence a lot of my in and out with it. And decided to get a math degree because that would be difficult and universally applicable. So then I got a math degree. At that point, I got a job doing more software development. It was a nice job, but it was pretty boring as well. Actually working on mainframes. So it was very retro. One thing, just to give an idea of how strange that world is, at some point I had to make a computer boot from Linux on virtual punch cards because those operating systems on the mainframe still think about things in terms of punch cards, even though they're not physical anymore, but the software still has to be on punch cards in some virtual way. That's it. They were IBM Big Iron mainframes.
That's how I got started too. The virtual punch card made my ass twitch just a little bit when you mentioned it. So sorry.
Yep. Yeah. It was like, okay. So I kind of got bored with that as well. It was interesting. I certainly learned a lot of strange trivia about mainframes. At that point, I decided to do something very different and get out of the town. I was still in Arkansas at that point. I kind of wanted to leave. And so I ended up going to a newly hatched graduate program for video game development at SMU called the Guildhall. Because it kind of made sense, because I'd always been kind of a multidisciplinary guy, and games are just deeply multidisciplinary. Like, you need to be technical, you need to be creative, you have to be able to talk to people who have a very different mindset than you to be productive. So I went through that program. It was, say, 2 years of very intense work. And then right after that, got a job out here in LA working for Treyarch. I then proceeded to spend the next 10 years in the video game industry doing audio software development for video games, essentially. It was a good time, but I kind of got burnt out. The game industry, particularly at the high end of it, is a very stressful, you don't have a life for years at a time. Earlier in my life, it was fun, and now I need a little bit of free time, and a little bit more relaxing. And and working on a 200-person project is just, even if it goes as well as it can go, it's always a mess, just because there's so much complexity with any sort of project of that scale. So, I should back up. Not quite there yet. During this time, I was basically working with sound designers. My sort of main position was I was one of two engineers whose job was just to support 9 or 10 sound designers. So if they needed something done, some software written, some tools made better, new runtime features in the game, then I would be one of the people that would develop them. And so we my day-to-day interaction was with sound designers on that job. And I, of course, made a lot of friends with those guys. And one of them, a few years ago, had gotten into Eurorack, had bought a nice little system. And I hadn't seen, like years and years ago in the early 2000s, I had a roommate that had a pretty large Dofer system. That was the last time I had seen modular. And the modules that my friend Sean bought were like of a completely different breed, because they were this, the modern, this was 5-6 years ago, sort of when the Eurorack, rebirth was happening and things are really getting exciting. And there were a lot of really interesting ideas and new ideas, and not just, old analog stuff like so much the older Eurorack was.
Right.
And so that got me really interested in the format again. I basically bragged to my friend that, I could make a module. He really wanted a module that would make the Atari 2600 sounds, a linear feedback shift register oscillator. They would actually tune. And I was like, that's no problem. I could do that in a weekend. And then he was like, well, then do it. And so I did. I made a prototype that ended up being the first module we ended up selling for him, it was, literally super glued together. But yeah, once I sort of got it working, it seemed silly not to, get into the space, because it was a lot of fun. I was really burnt out with the amount of time I was spending on the computer, which I think everyone is in our modern world. But it was one of the other reasons I was getting into electronics, again, was just to have something to do with my hands that was more outside the computer, which, Eurorack, that's one of the great, just the tactileness of it is still one of my favorite things about modular. Like, you really are touching and interacting with it. And it's such a more interesting connection than mousing around. So after doing this as a hobby for a while and making some modules that, were pretty popular last year, both of us, but I decided to retire from the games industry and pursue this full time. And that's what we're doing now. So that's a quick summary.
All right. Wow. That's a hell of a thing. Couple of quick questions before I move over to Kris. First of all, where in Arkansas are you from?
Fayetteville is where I spent most of my youth, Northwest Arkansas.
All right. I spent a year and a half out there. It was a good place to pass through.
Yeah.
You pursued a math degree. Did you actually attain the degree?
Yep. It's tough to beat math as a degree for getting you prepared for anything. I mean, the main thing you get out of a math degree is the ability to think rationally and to build self-consistent arguments, and like that's really the main skill. And there's obviously a lot of like specific math that's useful to a lot of specific engineering, for example, but like the main goal of like an undergraduate math degree is really just logical thinking. It's pretty good for everyone.
Yeah, well, not only logical thinking, but abstract thinking too, which is really, I think, is something that's really useful when you're doing something like trying to design a module that doesn't necessarily have a specific end goal. In terms of instead thinking in more abstract terms about what could be accomplished. Very interesting. All right, so Kris, how about you?
My path was substantially different than Stephen's. I too was interested in music from a pretty early age. I came from a musical family. My grandparents were professional piano and organ teachers, actually. So everybody in my family was, I'll put in quotes, encouraged to play instruments. What I discovered pretty quickly was I was really interested less in playing, and I was interested in that, but I was more interested in more engineering, live sound, that sort of thing. But I'm also not of the typical build that you find in a live sound sort of person, particularly in the 90s. I'm a little bit small for hefty 100-pound gear. So I realized pretty quickly that was not going to be in my future. So I was doing some studio stuff even in high school. I got to engineer my first album when I was 16, I think. It was not a big album, mind you, in a small studio in northeastern Ohio. But I got to do one, and that was really fun. When it came time for college, I realized that most likely I was not going to have a career doing music. So I chose science, which was what my other main strength was. So I got a degree in biology and then went on to do a master's. then a PhD in biology. So I have many, many years of training. My focus was, though, I still found a way to use my interest in music. My focus was acoustics. So I studied frogs and frog calling behavior. So I was still doing a lot with sound. If you ever need to know anything about recording frogs, I'm your girl. So that was what I spent many years doing all over, mostly the neotropics, all over Latin America. So I had a lot of good times doing that. When it came time to go into a job, though, I was training to go become a tenure-track professor. I realized as I was getting job offers that it just wasn't what I wanted to do. Like, I'd spent all these years training for this job that wasn't where I wanted to be. And right around that time, noise engineering was really starting to take off, and it became clear that it was not just a one-man job anymore. So Stephen took the company full-time. As he said, he retired from video games. Shortly after that, we were able for me to leave behind academia, and I came on full-time as well.
What is it about the academic world that was uninteresting to you?
I think, well, there are many things. I think one of them is that funding for scientific research has been cut and cut and cut. And as a result, getting anything done in terms of research is becoming increasingly difficult. Unfortunately, that's one of the currencies in which you're measured as an academic. If you can't do research, if you don't do research and publish that research, then you are not valued as a scientist. But if there's no funding to do that research, it's very, very difficult to do the research, to publish, to be valued as a scientist. And so it's kind of a never-ending cycle of being devalued. At the same time, there's an increasing effort I think there's an increase in adjunct. So they've been calling it the adjunctification of higher education. So as faculty retire or leave, they aren't replacing tenure-track lines, and so they replace people with part-time faculty who invariably are paid less and typically are treated not quite as well. That's not true everywhere, but typically that's true. No health insurance, no benefits of any kind, poor hours, various forms of poor treatment. And the students don't really understand the difference, so they have the same expectations of adjunct faculty as they do of tenure-track faculty, and don't understand why those faculty aren't as available, and when many times those faculty have to teach in 5 different places to pay their rent.
Right.
Like, I can't be here 8 hours a day to have office hours for you because I have to be at 5 other jobs.
Right.
I was fortunately never in that position, but it's just watching the path that academia is taking, it wasn't so much a world I was as interested in being a part of.
So Stephen started off noise engineering basically due to a gauntlet being thrown down, and so he glued together a module.
Yep.
How did that set you in a position to say, I trust this to leave academia behind and jump in?
Well, I think that part of it was that we looked at the numbers and the sales were going okay. Part of it was that we made the calculated risk that if we could distribute the workload across 2 people, we could be more productive. And if it's 2 people, that there's always the risk of hiring externally, right? Where if it's the 2 of us, if cuts need to be made, if a pay cut needs to happen, if, whatever, we can shoulder risk a little bit better if it's the 2 of us. We're also a little bit more invested than an external person might be,
right.
Since, the mortgage has to be paid.
Sure. So how do you divide the work between the 2 of you? What is each of your specialty, and what is the thing that if you were to shovel it off to somebody, what is the thing that you neither of you like doing?
First, we do shovel a lot of stuff off.
Yeah.
Just put that out there in front. We have the WMD, another URAC manufacturer, actually does the majority of the physical aspects of our business. They do the manufacture, they do the shipping. They're the people who are doing the boxing and stickering and all that. So we have a great business partner in them because they do shoulder a tremendous amount of just the logistical stuff. So we can spend our time focusing on the design of new products and the promotion of the products and the brand. That's primarily what we do. And so far as the split, it kind of splits pretty much that way. I do almost all the technical stuff. So Kris has actually started doing a lot of the CAD work, the PC board design.
I do anything administrative.
And
and I'm now I've taken over a lot of I do all the social media at this point, website.
Yeah, promotion videos.
But I'm not an engineer. So if it's hardware, software, that's going to always be Stephen.
There still is this sense where you had a very fine-tuned sense of audio and sonics and stuff. How do you bring that into play? Increasingly,
I'm doing things like the test, or we definitely have quite a modular setup. I'm looking around the room here, and there's quite a modular setup here. Yeah, we have trays and piles of modules, prototypes, not prototypes. Like, which one is this? So increasingly, I'm using my skills for that. The other sort of portion of things that we haven't talked about that I'm hoping to really bring to the company, this is something that we're starting to develop, but is going to have to wait a little bit till we're a little bit more mature as a company. But one of the things I'd like to do is develop low-cost scientific equipment, particularly for graduate students and people in the developing world. I've seen how limited equipment can be and how limited students and particularly my colleagues in other countries have been in equipment that they can get. We're not going to do a lot of equipment or anything like that, but maybe if we could do one item a year for reasonably low cost to make better equipment than what's out there, then that would be a hugely gratifying thing to me. And that's something that I'll be heading up.
If there's anything maybe I'm a little sick of right now is the constant talk of disruption, right? Disrupting industry. And it always seems to be like, we're going to take something that works pretty well and we're going to disrupt it because then, we can tear it down and do something new. And there's economics in that, right? It's actually interesting for me. And it all has to be done in software too. It's interesting to me that you're looking at being disruptive because you want more people to have access to stuff. It's an already kind of broken system, and it's one that's gonna actually allow. I mean, in what seems to be a world that is increasingly depressing interest in science, you're actually going to do things that are going to enhance the ability of people to do science. That's pretty interesting.
Well, I would have never called it disruptive to make some speakers for people to do playbacks, but I mean, the fact is, when I was doing the research that I was doing, like the best speakers that you could get are pig nose speakers, the little guitar amps.
Yeah, I know them. Yeah,
and they're fine for what they are, but they're not flat at all. The frequency response is not flat at all. And so when you're trying to do any sort of playback experiment where you're playing a frog call back to another frog, and you expect it to sound like what it's actually supposed to sound like, but you're playing it through a speaker that doesn't have a flat response, but at the same time, you need a speaker that you can take out that's going to be somewhat durable, that you can either plug in or put on batteries. Like, there aren't that many options out there. So, making something like that people can use that isn't expensive, like, that's not that hard. That's durable.
Right.
It's not hard.
First of all, I have to tell you that, I was a guitar player long before I was a synthesist, and so I've had my share of pig noses over the years. And so now the imagination in my head of what a frog going through a pig nose amp is, I have a very clear vision of exactly what that sounds like. And it's probably something that another frog wouldn't even recognize. So
it's pretty amazing, because I've seen people watch us, my students and me, as we stand in the middle of a pond in the middle of somewhere in the Amazon playing frogs and or sometimes traffic noise, depending on the experiment. So I'm in the middle of a pond in the middle of nowhere, and people are walking by looking at me like I am completely nuts. But, science.
Yeah, science. So let me ask a few details. First of all, it's interesting. I interviewed William at WMD a while ago. I need to touch base with him again. I actually went to his plant and I got to see his operation. It's really quite an amazing thing. And he does manufacturing for an awful lot of people. To what extent was him doing that something that really allowed you to do this?
Oh yeah,
would you have been able to do it if he hadn't been a manufacturer? No.
It's really absolutely not. Yeah, particularly when I was still, when it was still a hobby that was kind of growing like mad, and I was still working full time at a job that made ridiculous demands on my time. Like, there was no way I could have possibly ever manufactured modules, with the life I had. So like, and they actually do. I mean, he builds prototypes. They do a lot of like little things for us. Some of those are just history for when I was so time constrained that anything that they could do, I would have them do. But a lot of them, it works out well, just because we can focus entirely on product development now. It sort of started for a different reason than it continues to go on for now. But yeah, he's essential. He's been essential to our success. Absolutely.
Him and his entire team.
Yeah, all of the guys there.
Right. So I'm looking at your website. It looks like you have, on the front page, you have 19 different modules, which is, I didn't even know that was true until I looked here. Because I remember when again, I'm going to just start like making up pronunciations for this stuff, and then you can tell me what it actually is, right? I remember when the Atarexic Translatron was out, and I was like, oh, that seems pretty interesting. And then I was like, and then the Adigometric, whatever, yeah. When that came up, I was like, well, that looks really smart. The number of times that would have saved my ass, And then the Basimilus Iteritas, you've already said it twice, and I've already don't remember. But that came out, and that was the one that like everybody started getting into. That was the one where all of a sudden on Muff Wiggler, like every third ad would be like, I'll trade, it's like, for trade, my small child for your Basimilus Iteritas.
Yep.
It got to be a real thing. For you, what was like the curve? I mean, the Atari thing, was that pretty popular out of the gate? Or was the whole thing kind of a slow rise for you?
I mean, a bit of both. The Atarexic Translatron actually did really well, particularly, as the first module we did, like the pricing with the retailers was not great. Like, I think it actually could have done a lot better if the retail is cheaper, but there's, nobody, when you do your first module, you have to develop trust with all of the retailers and the customers. But yeah, we sold through, 150 units in 6 months on the AT, which for a first module for a brand is pretty good. And we still actually sell those. We still sell through a fair number of those. I mean, not big numbers, but consistently small numbers. But the Basimilus is definitely when
it put us on the map.
Put us in the map. It also put us in the black. So you have to put up. It takes a lot of money to get a module made and to develop it, to just the basics of the advertising you need to put out to release a module. There's a fair amount of cost there. Yeah, the BI was when we finally weren't just spending money of our own to try to get these out. But yeah, the BIA, which is the second version of the BI, continues to sell well as well. It's definitely been a module that has kept our company going. And, a lot of the smaller modules don't sell as well. But this, not surprising. We're trying to get particularly this year, we're going to put out a lot of smaller modules that are sort of utility and useful, but to try to just flesh out our module selection to really get, a really broad selection of modules. There's still a lot of niches and things. If you want to build an all-noise engineering case, there's still some things that we need to get out before that's really possible.
Is that a goal for you, though, to be able to make sort of like a standalone
Absolutely.
NE system?
Yep. It very much is. We're pretty close. By the end of the year, we should.
Ideally.
We should have that. And we can do it now, but we have to use some of the prototypes for this stuff that's coming out later this year. So.
I see. So now, what is the B? Okay, I'm going to use your plan of action here, which is to use initials, so I don't have to stumble over my front teeth here for the rest of the chat, right? I'm always curious when people do like a major version rev, right? So what was the impetus to go from the BI to the BIA, the Basimilus Iteritas altar?
I mean, a lot of it was just the BI was really the first major module that I designed, and I honestly just made a lot of mistakes in the design. And it was cool, like the core of it was awesome, and that's what people were obviously responding to. But there are just a lot of details that could have been a lot better about it. Largely mechanical. Like the BIA is 2 HP smaller. I think the knob arrangement is actually far superior. It's better for cable management. A lot of the other features were really driven by user feedback. Nobody liked having the knobs scale inputs rather than offset. So the knobs on the BIA now offset the voltage input, which also allows them to be used bipolar just implicitly. And everyone wanted to CV control the switches, which I had never even really considered, but we added that feature as well. And then one of the, it's almost a hilarious oversight with the original BIs that it didn't really make a really ballsy kick. Like, it just didn't make that sound. And so that was the other thing we added, was the liquid mode, which adds a pitch envelope. It's just a pitch envelope to the other mode. It's not a large change software-wise, but it's a huge change sonically. So the BIA can finally really punch you in the face. So that was pretty much it. Like the core synthesis, other than adding that third mode, like there were just a couple minor polishes, but nothing significant. And then the mechanical stuff and just the user interface stuff. So
from there, the next one that I caught really coming out was the LI. I'll let you pronounce it.
Loquelic Iteritas.
Iteritas. All right. Oh, okay, so here we're seeing the Iteritas being the Latin for oscillator, you idiot, kind of.
Yeah, it means repetitiousness.
Interesting.
Like iterative.
Yeah, iterative.
Oh, yeah, iterative. Okay, of course, sure. That is more of what people would normally think of as an oscillator rather than something that kind of had this percussion orientation, right?
Yeah, it is a free-running oscillator that's just made to give you the biggest, most gnarliest sounds you can get. It's just a big noise beast. It has 3 modes, and they're all modes based off dual pitches. So it's in the complex oscillator sort of family where the interaction between multiple elements generates some really extreme complexity of sound. So
it sounds really raunchy in a lot of places.
In a good way.
You've kind of put your stake in the ground as kind of doing stuff that's aggressive, edgy, noisy, in your face, which is certainly in the case of current Euro world, that's kind of a good spot to be. That's where a lot of the people coming to Euro rack systems are that's where they want to be sonically anyway, right? But you also found ways to do it in a way that wasn't necessarily a complete, I'll be kind and say a complete homage to Don Buchla designs or someone else's previous designs, right?
I mean, there's still, like with the Loquelic, like all 3 modes are old thoughts. I mean, they're not
70s style.
There's a lot of original sheen on them that I put, but the algorithms were all published in the 70s.
Sure.
Okay. There are 2 of them are not well known outside of the sort of people who just like to read audio synthesis papers from the 70s, but they're really cool. They're really, really interesting algorithms just from a technical standpoint, and they sound cool.
Well, but now, see, that's what's interesting to me, though, is, I actually like reading old papers from the 70s, but there's an awful lot of old papers from the 70s, quite frankly. And so what were the things that influenced you to come up with, where were you that you ran across these? Was this something that you ran across in your research in the game audio development, or is it something that you just got a burr under your saddle and decided to do some research? What got those in your attention?
Right. I'm a pretty voracious reader as part of it. These are not really related to anything I was doing in games. I like all of the algorithms in the LI. Well, one of them this phase modulation. That's very common. So I'm not. The other two are both actually referenced in one of the Curtis Rhodes books, probably Microsounds, and that's where I actually found those two papers. The original Aquelic was just this algorithm called VOSIM, which I'm pretty sure it was like a 4-page section of Microsounds talking about vocal synthesis algorithms, particularly the older ones, the like true synthesis, that I found really fascinating, and the papers were really interesting, and I mocked one up and was like, this thing sounds amazing. Like at some point, I needed 3 algorithms for the LI, and I had like a table of like 5 possibilities that I'd read about, and just trying to figure out the ones that all fit with the same sort of control structure the best. And that's kind of how it ended up being those specific 3, was because they all kind of, I could fit them into the same knobs and have the controls not be completely different,
Sure. Have it still make sense, right?
Exactly. So yeah, I'm not sure I've answered your question. It's really, I just read a lot. Pretty much the summary. Because there's a ton of great ideas that people seem to have forgotten, buried in some PDF somewhere on the internet.
As I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, one of the things that I've noticed is that you're one of the companies that's like kind of loved, right? There are some companies that people say like, yep, I'll buy it because it works, and there are other companies that people get passionate about. You're one of those. Why do you think that is? And what do you ever like say, we have these passionate people, so we need to go out of our way to do X, or conversely, we want more passionate people, so we're going to do X to try and make that happen? How do you interact when something commercial also turns passionate for people?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think we ever intend. This was never an intention to develop a passionate following. I mean, it's great.
Great, yeah. We're not going to complain.
Absolutely, our users are awesome.
We get great questions, but we also get great feedback, and I think maybe that's part of it, is that we really seek out and listen to feedback from our users. We have a network of local friends. We're fortunate to be in LA, where there is a pretty substantial modular scene, I guess. So we have a lot of people that we can hand a module to and say, give us feedback. Hand them a prototype and say, what would you change? What do you like? Whatever. And we can go outside of just the two of us and say, what needs to be fixed? And we get a lot of really good feedback from those people. But even after something's in the wild, we get a lot of feedback and module ideas. People email us pretty regularly with ideas, questions, and whatever. That's part of what spawned if you're looking at the website, there's now a blog that we just launched. And we're focusing on questions that we get at trade shows all the time. We get the same questions over and over again. So trying to just answer those questions in a sort of informational way. So maybe that's a start. What else can you add?
I don't know. I mean, people got really excited about the BI. That's like, when that happened, that was because of the Basimilus. Like that's when people started becoming very excited about the brand. And I think, it has a very unique character for a variety of technical reasons. Like, I don't think even still there's a module out there that can quite give you as many different timbres and how big of a space it is, and so people became very excited by just sort of like how much power it has. I don't know. And then it just sounds clanky as hell. People also really like, I don't know, somehow we like with that module and with the LI, we just hit some nerves that people really responded to. And like, it wasn't intentional. Both of those modules are just me trying to make something that made me happy, that made all of the sounds I wanted to. And then as many more possible combinations, back to the abstraction we were talking about that earlier, actually. So yeah, I'm very glad that we have passionate users though.
Yes.
I certainly have talked to a lot of people in the LA area. I kind of had this run here where I've interviewed a lot of the LA modular mafia that all knows each other and interacts with each other, and they all talked a lot about you. You mentioned that you have them available sort of as testers. Do you guys ever play out?
Yep.
So you're players as well as just builders. That's cool. Do you ever do the modular on the spot stuff?
Yep. I've done it twice, maybe 3 times now. Just twice, and Kris has done it once. Yeah.
I was hoping, I'm I think I might be doing it again in May. I have to talk to Bana again. She'd asked me to do it in April for the ladies takeover, but we had just come back from Super Booth and I didn't even case together, so I had to opt out of that one.
So you say you just got back from the Super Booth. You guys were at NAMM too, right? At that like crazy booth?
Yeah.
Which unfortunately I didn't get a chance to spend as much time at this year as I have in the past. What is that like for you? I mean, talk about different than either your backgrounds,
Right, yeah.
don't set you up for like dropping in the middle of music instrument loony land, right? And NAMM is just a different version of what you would have experienced at Super Booth. Do you do any other shows? Do you do like KnobCon or any of these others?
We're talking about doing KnobCon this year.
We've done a variety of them. It's always, we don't have the time or the resources to hit all of them, so it's always, we just have to make a judgment call about whether we think it's the right show to go to. This year, it changes every year which one we go to too.
Sure.
Yeah.
What is that like for you? First of all, you're going to interact with a lot of people you never saw before and probably never going to see again, or maybe only have ever interacted with via email. What's it like to get out on the road with that?
Yeah, it definitely. So I'm of the introverted persuasion, pretty extremely, I guess. So, like, one of the things I actually really enjoyed, but that was very difficult for me when I first really started going to NAMM. NAMM was the only show we did for NAMM and the Alamo Haven events, but they weren't. But like, to talk about getting me like out of my comfort zone, like it was just hugely, I guess, uncomfortable, but good because like, it's one of those things that I'm like, this is going to make me better talking to people. It's going to make me just, in general, a better person. And so it was, the first couple of years of it were pretty intense. Nowadays it's old hat and it's just kind of like, yes, I'm going to talk to 45 people today and tell them all the same thing. And it's great. And I'm at the point where I'm starting to guess I get cynical about getting demos, but I really love talking to the customers one-on-one. Like it's fantastic. Like that experience is pretty much always great. And there are a few assholes out there, I guess, but not very many in the Eurorack world.
There are many more assholes at NAMM than there are at some place like Super Booth.
Yeah, well, NAMM is so crazy. There's so many randos that walk in. They're like, "Where's the keyboard?" It's like,
right.
Or the guy that said, "I don't believe in this. Convince me."
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a lot of strange activity. A lot of times at trade shows like that, you don't even know what people's... you have no idea why they're there in the first place. Right. But secondly, you also don't know what their angle is. Half the time you're like, okay, you get this sense that, okay, maybe they're from some, big electronics firm who's just sweeping through to see if there's any industry they can obliterate on their way to their next, major oil spill or something. Right? And it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird to see sort of like very industrialist people interact with the music world, which are largely... it's funny because there are some identifiers I see at music industry trade shows that are different from almost the rest of the entire population. One of them is that you go outside the building, there are like 40 times more smokers in the MI world than there is anywhere else, just I think because, they just walked out of playing at the local Holiday Inn and now they're all of a sudden hired by PV or something, right? So it's kind of like a very different entree path into the industry than most industries. I think it's pretty interesting.
It's definitely interesting to be, just sort of adding on to something that Stephen said a minute ago, like talking to the customers though at these trade shows. You're right, there are some of these people that you're not quite sure what their angle is, but talking to the customers is definitely the highlight at these shows. And anybody that sees us at one of these, I encourage you to come talk to us and ask us any questions that you have. I promise you, it will not be the dumbest question we get.
That's hilarious. That's excellent. Again, it's a little different selling modules than it would be like if you're selling ukuleles or, Eddie Van Halen guitar stacks or something. I guess it's a kind of an interesting customer base you're working with. So for those of us who are a little obsessive about our synth stuff, though, what are the areas of your business that we're going to see changing? What is your product lineup going to change in ways that are going to be interesting to us Eurorack fanatics?
The big thing I think is just we'll be expanding a bit to have products in pretty much every form that you might need. So if you need utilities, whatever you need, we expect to be slotting into each of those different domains.
Just to reinforce that, like, we have a lot of utility stuff coming out this year. Next year should be the year of audio processing for us. We have a whole bunch of stuff stacked up for that. We have a couple really exciting things we're not going to talk about today, unfortunately, that we'll be talking about next year at NAMM outside of the Eurorack space. Well, two of them. One of them we'll be talking about in a couple months, but we're not quite ready to go public with some of those yet. We have a lot to come, I guess, is a quick summary across the board.
Some awesome new modules that we've been showing at shows, so those people are starting to see those.
Yep. And we have even a couple more surprises in Eurorack for this year as well that, once again, we'll talk about in 2 months.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll touch base in 2 months then. That sounds very exciting. I want to thank you guys for spending the time, for taking the time out of your schedule and for chatting. It was really great to get caught up. Next time I'm out in LA, we'll go out for a coffee or something. I really enjoy hanging out with you today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Bye.
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 Well, many thanks to Stephen and Kris for spending their time. That was really interesting. I'm really anxious to see the new stuff they come out with, and hopefully by the time it comes out, I'll know how to say the names of their modules. Iteritas, indeed. So anyway, thank you very much for listening again this week. Thanks a lot for continuing to tune in and telling your friends. We're getting really nice growth still in the podcast, so that's a good sign, right? But keep on keeping on with that. I want to just a few shout outs again to my employer, Cycling 74. They're always very supportive of this. Thanks to the people over at Syntopia. Hope you all get well. And everyone else that's helping out. I really appreciate all of your work. Thanks much, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.